Hello and welcome to the 2022 Australia's Economic Outlook, the inaugural event exploring the pathways to a strong economy.
Treasurer, you do have the toughest job in Australia and we're honoured that you're here with us today with all the answers, no doubt. So let me welcome you to the stage, the Treasurer of Australia, Jim Chalmers.
Now, we've got a choice when we think about these challenges in our economy. We can kind of tiptoe around them, we can try and pretend them away, but my style and my preference is to be pretty blunt about them. We do have a whole range of things going in our favour, and I mentioned some of those things a moment ago, and we've got cause for confidence in the medium term and in the longer term. But in my view, there's no use mincing words when it comes to this inflation challenge, which will get worse before it gets better. Inflation will be, in my view, significantly higher than the 5.1% that we saw in the most recent data, and so we need to be upfront with all of that. And we need to work together to address these challenges. Now, from my point of view, in this relatively new job that I've got, what I'm going to try and do is to try and structure this collaboration that I'd like us all to engage in as part of this big national conversation about our economic outlook and how we strengthen our economy and our society. And some of the opportunities for that in terms of the next 18 months or so of work out of my portfolio. You know, clearly already we're beginning to go through the budget line by line, myself and my colleague Katie Gallagher, to work out where we can redirect spending from unproductive purposes to more productive purposes. I'm looking to begin the review of the Reserve Bank in the next month or two, and hopefully that would report sometime around the middle of next year, and I know a range of people in the room have got views on that, which I welcome. I'll provide that ministerial statement to the Parliament in July when it returns so that I can update some of the forecasts. We'll have a jobs summit sometime after Parliament resumes at this point, and from that a white paper on the challenges in our labour market, including skills shortages and the gender pay gap and some of those associated issues as well. By the end of September we'll have the final budget outcome for last year. We'll have the budget in October. And I haven't said this publicly before, but we're looking at the budget being on or around the 25th of October, subject to the finalisation of the parliamentary sitting schedule, but certainly in the last week of October is our objective when it comes to the budget. The Productivity Commission will release their 5-yearly review of productivity in February of next year. The May budget will follow soon after that, and I also hope to have an intergenerational report during the course of calendar 2023 as well. So that's just to give people an indication of the various ways that we can collaborate and you can have meaningful input into our thinking on the economy. Let me just finish on a really quite an optimistic note, because I'm conscious that by running through the challenges that we are most concerned about, I need to be careful, we all need to be careful to recognise as well what we have going for us too. And this final observation is prompted a bit by a question I got yesterday in a press conference about whether the new government had been served a particular kind of sandwich in coming to government. And also a cartoon in one of the other newspapers today which adopted a very similar theme. I don't see it that way. I genuinely think that Australia has a really big opportunity here to have a stronger economy and a stronger society after COVID-19 than we had before. I really strongly believe, and I wouldn't be here if I didn't, that Australia can take its place, its rightful place, at the absolute first rank of national economies in the world. But first we need to navigate together this choppy waters that we are dealing with now. It's not beyond us. It will get harder before it gets easier, but I'm confident with the spirit that I've detected in all the conversations I've had the last 18 days, which I see here as well today, that we can get through a difficult period and we can have a strong economy and a strong society after we do. Thanks very much.
Budget repair, wages and the housing crisis are key issues affecting all Australians. Our political leaders had their say on the challenges we face.
What would have to occur for us to fall into recession? What are you trying to avoid as Treasurer? And then I might pose the same question to Jennifer. What are your fears in terms of a recession here?
That's not on my list of fears for our domestic economy. You know, I as I said at the end of my contribution before, you know, I genuinely believe that we have, certainly in the medium term, more opportunities than challenges, but the challenges that we have right now are incredibly serious and incredibly significant. That's how I see it. If you want to think about the challenges around the world, and you think about, you know, a lot of commentators that many of you would read are, you know, fear a recession in the US or the UK. Their fears there are about inflation getting out of control, central banks having to react so substantially that instead of tapping the brakes, they slam the brakes on those big economies. And so that's of concern to us, to be upfront about it. That's not the only international concern. You know, clearly Russia-Ukraine is having an impact, particularly on food security and energy security. That's the other international concern. And then thirdly, again, frankly, the Chinese management of COVID, you know, still chasing a version of zero COVID in China has big implications for the global economy as well. But in terms of our own domestic circumstances, we've got a difficult period to navigate over the next little while, but I still genuinely believe that our future is bright so long as we make the right choices now.
So, Jennifer, as I flagged, how concerned are you about the economy overheating, push for wages, inflation, and then collapsing?
I think everyone's very concerned about it. I agree with the Treasurer, though. I don't think we believe that we're heading for a recession. But there are some big pressure points we've got to manage. We've got to do something about those labour shortages because they will slow activity down, not speed it up. And we've got to get out of this sense of, oh, well, that's going to push wages up. Well, it might in some sectors, but over the short term only. And ultimately that just starts to cannibalise our capacity to kind of grow our way out of this. I think we have got to manage the energy transition better and in a more coordinated way. And, you know, I've been banging on about this for a decade, that, you know, we need national, consistent, predictable energy policy so that companies can invest. I think the big warnings for us are investment. You know, we've still got investment as a share of GDP at levels that we had in the 1990s when we were last in a recession. We've got to do more about making ourselves attractive for investment, whether it's domestic or international, and that's a myriad of things. You know, a very uncompetitive tax rate, a massive regulatory burden on business, and of course the whole question about can you actually get the skilled people that you want to have to make an investment decision in Australia. So when I talk to big companies, they say, well, what makes my decision? Am I going to be able to get the skilled workforce that I need? Am I going to be paying more to actually get these projects up? You know, planning approvals which take a decade, you know, and we're competing with places like Singapore that can do them in 36 months. Many of these levers are in our control. We need to take them, as the Treasurer said. We need to kind of get ourselves through these headwinds. And then we need to do the work, which we talked about in that document the Treasurer was talking about, of diversifying the economy, of building the new industries, of driving a skills system that gets people higher wages. And just to pick up on the wages point, you know, we have got to get enterprise bargaining working, because what has changed in that time, that 10 years, is the EBA system has collapsed, and people on EBAs get paid $100 a day more than anyone else. So we've got to get that back. And I think on the wages profit share, I agree broadly, but when you strip non-mining out of that equation, it's a different equation.
So the Treasurer is talking about more collaboration. You said that a number of times in your speech today. Jennifer, you're talking about the same thing. The unions and business, Dan, can you work together? What do you think you can achieve if you do? And what's your red line?
Well, notwithstanding, Jennifer has got a history of talking about collaboration, so I'll give a pass for her. But I always find it ironic that when there's a change of government, all of a sudden collaboration is back in favour. And, you know, I think it has been something which I personally have long believed in, and our union has believed in, that if businesses are working well and are profitable, our members will have good, well-paid, secure jobs. It's a pretty simple philosophy, and most nations around the world work on collaboration. On our international measures, we are well down in terms of collaboration in comparison to a lot of developed countries around the world. I think there's an opportunity to sit down. The only time the previous government sat down to work on collaboration was when our country was hit by a massive crisis called COVID. And they set up the manufacturing task force, which I was involved in, which Frank and Kevin were going to fits about. And then there was also the conversation around some of the industrial relations reforms, which came to nothing. I do find it interesting that some in the business community, particularly the business groups, are coming out to say, well, we need to have collaboration on everything going forward, because that wasn't necessarily the approach for the last decade.
Just want to talk a little bit about housing policy, Owen, if I could ask you. We saw during the campaign a couple of different policies, the super for housing, ultimately unsuccessful, and this government's introducing where the government takes a share of your house if you're a first home buyer. How do you think that will affect the market, and what do you make of those policies?
I think any policy that helps first home owners get into a home is welcome. The existing policy, it's very limited. I think it's going to be well oversubscribed, and so I don't think it's going to have a major impact on the market. The bigger issue for our market is supply. And, at the moment we're looking at a rental crunch that's coming. Rental listings are at a 10-year low. Rents are going up and up and up, and that is that will affect people who can least afford it. We talk about people with mortgages, but people who are renting are in for a big rise in what they have to pay for their accommodation. A lot of investors have left the market, and with the cost of building materials, there are a lot of projects and a lot of housing construction that's actually being cancelled, and so I think we are in for a big supply crunch. So in terms of policy, any policy that encourages first home buyers to at least go for new stock and help with that supply, any policy that will encourage industries like build to rent, which are a big part of the UK and the US markets, but the tax system here prohibits that. I think they're the policies that we think need to come in, because we are in for a big crunch, and particularly for those who can least afford it, who rent.
And particularly talking about supply, I feel like we've been talking about that for a decade as well. So you'd be particularly interested in any kind of federation or cooperation between the states and federal government. Do you think it might finally happen this term?
I think it can on some of them. So build to rent's, I think, an easier one. We've got to solve for the GST impact on that. They're treated as commercial rather than residential, and I think the states can solve for the land tax issue on that without a big hit to budgets. In longer term, we would love to see, more progressive reform, particularly around the most regressive tax, I think, in this country, which is stamp duty.
Absolutely.
But that is state-based. I understand, it's not federal, but I think that the federal government can actually help the transition in that and play a leadership role across the states. We've seen Canberra go that direction. New South Wales have talked about it and backed away, but if we can do that, the efficiencies that will drive in our economy, from people who live closer to their place of work, to be more mobile around the country, I think there's some huge benefits in that.
Coming up, business leaders have their take on how we rebuild and maintain a resilient economy. Welcome back to the 2022 Australia's Economic Outlook. With a global recession looming and a once-in-a-lifetime economic challenge, we turn to our business leaders for their analysis.
Kevin, one of the biggest energy generators in Australia. Oil and gas, Santos is, a powerhouse. If you got everything your way today that you want, could you solve the gas crisis in Australia immediately? Could you solve the electricity crisis in Australia immediately if you got everything that you wanted today?
Today. Not today I couldn't, or we couldn't.
How long would it take you?
Oh, look, the reality of the situation, I made a speech in Melbourne last week and I said we can't conjure up new gas. And what's effectively happened over the last decade, as gas resources have been used up, and new projects have not been able to come forward and be developed and bring new supply into the market, that all the buffer, all the slack in the system has been used up. And so what you're seeing right now is some coal capacity going offline at short notice, renewables underperforming, and the combination of all of that plus cold weather has meant that these coal-fired power generators have come looking for that gas to buy off the spot market, taking that gas out of the market, and the 10% or so of the market that is the spot market is now bidding the price up, and they're paying very high prices. And there's nothing you can do to resolve that situation in terms of conjuring up new gas until we get the coal capacity restored.
So for the perfect world that many people would like, and that is that we can completely power our nation on wind and solar. Australia is a long, long way off that reality right now.
Yeah, it's a big change. And I want to be very clear, whilst I think that we need to urgently address the power system issues and getting coal back online, and you can see there's a variety of things associated with that, I'm also an equal advocate that we've got to accelerate into the transition. And I think what this should highlight is that the actual enormity of the challenge to invest in the energy infrastructure required to deliver a net zero ambition is enormous. And if you lean into the transition and we recognise we need to build that new cleaner power system, the reality is we need to actually deal with approvals and various other matters that go with it. But there's an enormous investment opportunity over time. I think we're just recognising right now that you do that, but you want to make sure that old system can perform reliably while you're on the way. And I think the goals are socially, technologically, good for the planet and good for customers. I'm a firm believer in that future. I think we need to be really clear, though, that there is an enormous investment required over time. We've got to get on with it, and we've got to take the community and customers with it, otherwise we'll lose the mandate for that transition.
Okay, so I want to go to another pressure point. So we've got energy, we've got electricity and gas, but there's another one that's out there. There's rising interest rates. There's the pressure for wages to rise. Now, I think a pretty good barometer in this country for all of those pressures is Uber. Now, the reason I'll say that is, on one hand, Uber sees the demand for people moving goods and services and food around the place. On the other side of it, it sees the pressure for people to earn more money, who go in and get a second or third job basically driving Uber. So, Dom Taylor, who is the boss of Uber in Australia, just explain now the pressures that you're seeing, in particular with people wanting to come in to use your services, rideshare services, to actually earn the extra income that they require to take a bit of heat off rising interest rates and the fact their wages aren't rising as much.
Yeah, good question. The reality is if you look at the number of people that are making money with Uber today, drivers and delivery people, it's more than the start of COVID. But that said, we don't have enough. And that's because we've seen the rebound in a few key consumer trends. We've seen the rebound in CBD, inner city. We've seen the rebound in midweek travel, and we've seen the rebound in tourism. A lot of tier one events and also international tourism. We've had 80 people from 80 different countries use Uber in 2022 year to date. So we've got this huge demand come back. We've got supply, it's growing, but it's still not where it needs to be. And so we need to keep growing it. The reality is it's the most competitive job market we've seen here in recent years. And so if you spend an hour watching TV, listening to radio, walking around the city, you will see ad after ad advertising new jobs. And that's more advertising for new jobs than we've seen in the decade before combined. And what's happening is you have to be able to offer a value prop that stacks up. And your promises have to stack up with, in reality, with what you're putting out in your ads or your marketing, right? And so we're seeing in the market at the moment, if you're not paying enough, if you're not providing a holistic job experience, whether it be learning and development, growth, benefits, people are going to move on, and they're going to move on to the next job very, very quickly.
Okay, so I'll go to Steve McCann just on this subject as well, because you have a shortage of staff around your resorts around Australia right now. There's not only skill shortages, but there's actually physically labour shortages. What's that doing to wages pressures in Australia?
It's no doubt contributing. That said, the hospitality industry has been very hard hit by COVID, and we're one of the first industries to be shut down and then reopened and then shut down again. So I think the biggest issue that people in our industry would point to in that period is job security rather than wage growth. So the phenomenon of the economy bouncing and inflation emerging is a recent phenomenon. We've had 10 years of low interest rates, 10 years of low growth. We have 20,000 staff around the country, and a very significant number of them are on enterprise agreements. And what we've seen during that period is that our salaried staff have actually been falling behind because they don't have the benefit of those enterprise agreements. So I think there's a lot of complexity in the subject around how we address the wage growth question. And our view would be, yes, there are people looking for higher wage growth now than they have been historically, but there has to be a productivity trade-off as well.
Well, again, Dan Walton said productivity has increased, and I'm just wondering, do you agree with that? I'm not sure.
I think again that's in pockets, so I think a lot more can be done. There needs to be investment in skills training as well. So, you know, again, the supply-demand conversation that was had earlier, we have currently a supply shortage of highly skilled labour. So the investment needs to go into training. At Crown we train about 1,300 people a year. They have Certificate 3, Certificate 4 and diploma outcomes which they can utilise in other companies outside of Crown. I think there needs to be more investment and government support for training regimes broadly, and the immigration debate.
Can I hit one other big subject on the panel, and that's China. We've just seen the Prime Minister and business delegation head off to Indonesia and look for opportunities there, part of the argument being diversification. Perhaps, Steve, I can ask you, obviously China has been very important in the relationship for Crown, but can we operate sort of, you know, at two levels and basically have our miners taking great advantage and that just carries on, and various other sectors is fine, and then we get pinged in wine, we get pinged in beef, but we just carry on, even though we've got all this tension happening at a geopolitical level? Is that just going to be business as usual?
I think business interaction with China, but also with other countries, and we're seeing what's happening in Europe with Russia, it's always evolving and changing. So I think businesses need to make decisions which factor in the current state of affairs between the relevant countries. And it will always change. There are issues like modern slavery which were very low down on people's radar 10 years ago. And with public companies today, they are right up near the top of the radar. And those things have to continue to be taken into account in business decisions. Who are the proper partners that you want to work with? I think one of the things for the gaming industry, which we need to acknowledge, the industry, I think one of the biggest mistakes the industry has made, and this is not an Australian-specific issue, is going after the low-hanging fruit without having regard to the issues that was going to give rise to.
And you're saying that many of the gamblers that came here, the junket gamblers that came here to Australia, from China in particular, you're saying they were the low-hanging fruit, and maybe the checks and balances weren't done as they should have been in order to maximise the profits?
There's no doubt that as a country, we had a pretty low grasp, I think, a poor grasp of what all of the financial crime rules, issues, regulations were, how they're all meant to work together. And I think financial institutions, gaming industry, across the board, it's been poor. There's been a massive uplift. So I think part of that was the low-hanging fruit was there. No one was really doing the right thing to make sure that we analyse that properly. That's happening today. And as you would expect, I've had a pretty good look around at other markets, and I think we'll come out of all of this shift through the various different royal commissions that have happened, not just with us, but with the financial institutions, and we can be proud of the fact that we've elevated to a much more sophisticated level.
Thank you for your company. That's all from the First Australia's Economic Outlook. A special thanks to our partners realestate.com and Crown Resorts.